Good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Sainato with Real Progressives. Tonight, I'm speaking with Zach Haller, another fellow Real Progressives. This is a special, live stream. Steve took the night off, which is a rare oddity, but I'm excited to, finally do an interview with Zach. So, Zach, thanks for taking the time on Friday night to do this.
You're my Friday night happy hour, man. What could
Well, we'll get right into it. I wanted to talk, pick your brain a little bit about what your thoughts were on the DNC class action lawsuit that's, been revived, after a 6-month deliberation. So, I mean, who knows how long Judge Slock's written order to see what his decision is on the motion to dismiss. But how optimistic do you think you are on what the decision might be, and what that would mean for the Democratic Party? How will it affect that?
Yeah, it's crazy to think about because no matter what happens, there's going to be massive fallout. So it's like, I think that's part of the reason people are afraid to talk about it right now, is because considering any of the outcomes is bad for the Democrats. I honestly think the likelihood of it getting struck down is slim to none. I don't think that's possible at all. The judge raised so many issues that the likelihood of it, I just keep having, as soon as I think of the possibility of this happening, I flash right back to the hearing, or whatever the Comey comment was, when he listed off all of Hillary Clinton's crimes and at the end, but no charges. I cannot imagine the judge being like, there's all these different issues in serious question. The DNC basically lied and contradicted themselves in court, and basically admitted that they don't care if they committed fraud, if they did, but they didn't. And so it's like, the likelihood of the judge saying absolutely nothing here has value, I think, is impossible. So that's my personal opinion. Impossible, obviously. If it happens, they're screwed either way. So if I'm wrong on that, that's cool too. But I think it's going to move on to the next phase. And I don't know exactly what the next exact procedural step will be in terms of what we'll have to ask Jared what the exact next notification he expects to receive is, because my guess is it will be some procedural element that starts to initiate the designation of the people in each of the classes. So that's, I think, what procedurally happens before the discovery phase gets to begin, because the classes, and this is litigation and it varies by where the courts are. So Jared need to be the one to tell us, but that's what we should ask him, is what the next exact step will be, because it's probably going to be a long time. My guess is this won't be. That's the question we should also be floating, is when we think this is going to happen, because especially with how politically motivated so many of the State Department releases are, how much effort they're putting to delay the Hillary Clinton, everything, just delay it as far as possible. This could be, honestly, I hate to say, it could be until 2019 before this happens. They could just kick this past 2018 entirely, and we don't hear this until 2019. So that's a question that we should ask Jared, because on the one hand, sometimes things move really quickly, but on the other hand, this is so complicated, and 2018 is going to be a mess with in the courts with the elections as it is. So not sure, but I think it's going to move on to the next step.
Well, I certainly hope so. And yeah, they've really dragged this out for almost a year now, and they haven't even gotten past deciding on a motion to dismiss. And it's, I'm not sure what the DNC would do if Judge Slock denied the motion to dismiss, but I'm sure as much red tape as possible they're going to throw at the Becks. So do you think the media blackout, the mainstream media has not really covered this at all? I know that, there's been some retweeting of other people's stuff recently, but, there's been some big stories when it first came out. And then the whole thing with the process server and the DNC being really shitty, trying to just stall it after his unfortunate passing. And then they've made really stupid arguments in trying to get it dismissed initially. So, I mean, do you think this media blackout is going to continue even in that discovery process? So, why do you think the media has been ignoring this lawsuit?
Yeah, so I think that there's two main reasons, and I'm trying to flesh this out in some words at this moment. But I think there's two main reasons why the media is completely silent right now. We typically don't see this type of absolute radio silence. Typically, the Republican sites would kind of want to be jumping on it too. So I think that there's two things that are causing that right now. Is one, basically everyone is implicated. Basically every single person that was involved in the mainstream media. I mean, we saw, you and I and people watching, it was blanket coverage. No comment on Bernie. Trump is the worst thing on earth all year. So there is so much stuff that could be construed as evidence. There are so many local reporters that were probably getting these press releases disseminated by the DNC/Hillary campaign. So many people, basically everybody in commercial media is implicated in one way or another. So I think that there's a massive panic going on. No one even wants to even touch it or even be exposed for proposing a story, because then all of a sudden a new side could have to be taken with an internal dispute at different, all the different ranks and files in these media organizations. It's really a massive earthquake that's going on right now in the corporate media, and it implicates Republicans as well, because to the extent that they participated in that, as Hillary moved some of the conservative Republicans into her camp, those Fox News and some of the other more conservative outlets also are going to be implicated one way or the other too. A lot of people have been promoted since the election that maybe they weren't implicated before, but now they're in a new role working with someone that might be implicated. And there's obviously so much impunity that happens that maybe feel very cavalier, like they won't be prosecuted. But it's a new time, and especially with all Republican wins across the country, there may be a lot more policing of Democratic corruption at local levels now, where maybe the biggest people aren't getting busted, but local reporters, if there's really clear evidence of something right now be getting cut, there could who knows? So I think there's an absolute panic right now going on, and no one wants to even pitch a story because that could incriminate them or their colleagues. I also think that they haven't, because I don't know why they didn't expect this to ever happen, and you'd think that they would have done some kind of preparation to figure out what to do when they had to give these oral arguments. But I thought, just like we saw with all of these events that happened over the course of the election, and even since the election, we see the messaging strategy in the consistency of the headlines across all these different mainstream media entities. I thought that you probably thought this too. We probably were all of us people were probably bewildered that the Democrats didn't have a consistent message in their court presentation, because you would think that they would have planned that. So they already had planned telling the media, okay, so our messaging in court is going to be XYZ. So the media has that, so they can cover it lightly and act like they're covering exactly what the Democrats want them to cover, because that's what they've been doing the past 2 years anyway. They can't necessarily do that anymore because that's now being questioned as fraud. So maybe they're nervous to proceed with that type of, PR strategy. But it, to me, shows that it's such a disaster, and these idiots just have no clue what they're doing, that there wasn't a plan set forth by the Democrats' council to know what their one message was going to be, A. B, he botched whatever the one plan was going to try to be and contradicted himself so many times that it's hard for even me to write, any of us to write about this, because you try to write something and then something else in the court transcripts directly contradicts it. And see, there's just no good way to figure out how to convey what the Democrats want people to think right now. So it's basically a lack of messaging because they didn't plan a strong court presentation, and absolute media panic because everyone is implicated right now, and even pitching a story behind the scenes at corporate media could implicate everyone up to the very top of this. It's insane to think about, really.
Yeah, I agree. I think initially you had a lot of media outlets because it was the lawsuit was initially filed in June, so you had a lot of media outlets in the Democratic Party really wanting to manufacture the consent of unity, the image of unity. They did that at the Democratic National Convention. and even though a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters were spreading around what was actually going on at the convention and what the Clinton campaign and the DNC were doing, turning off the lights, taking away signs, what they did to Nina Turner, they really blacked that out as well. So we're constantly seeing this blacking out in conjunction with the Democratic Party establishment. And you're right. You haven't seen any Democrats even mention this lawsuit or really bring up the primaries as well. When you bring up the primaries, then it's, oh, you're relitigating the primaries, where the party is unified. Nancy Pelosi said it this week. Democrats are united. They keep saying that's their mantra, even though they keep attacking Bernie Sanders supporters, and it's obvious every week that there isn't that unity.
Lie or lies.
Yes.
Let me add something. So part of what I'm like getting anxious just thinking back about over the past year, just like you said, all of these instances at the Democratic National Convention, all these instances where we witnessed the Bernie blackout happening, we witnessed the rigged primaries was happening, and thinking about who's going to be coming into discovery on this, what evidence exists. There's going to be so much evidence that people, just like the lay person, anyone actively involved as a volunteer in the Bernie Sanders campaign, if anyone has one story of any official or anyone coming down on them, it's like, wait a second, that might have been part of the plan. For example, so when Bernie lost to Hillary, you may recall this, I tweeted, this I will not fall in line thing. It got like 1,000, 2,000 retweets, whatever. And then I got on the Seattle News, and Seattle News interviewed me, and there's a video, and then they brought me in again later. And I haven't really spoke about it, and I tweeted a little bit about it, but I can't really get long, coherent thoughts out on Twitter or stories, and I haven't really started telling those to people online. I just talk about it with my friends. But those interviews, I felt so targeted, and it was the most trippy ass shit, having been observing all of this from the internet. I get in, they bring me in, and the guy was literally badgering me. He's like, well, why wouldn't you vote for Hillary? But you can't. It was literally, Mike, I was like, oh my God, the script is happening to me right now. I've seen this script sent to every media entity. They're all reporting it like just sheep. And here it is now happening directly to me. The exact line of questioning they gave to this guy. And he's just this mouthpiece. And so it's like, even that type of thing, I'm like, all of this evidence is like going to start kind of percolating. Sorry, I wanted to tell that story about those interviews that I gave because I saw those tweets and I was just like, I'm having so many flashbacks that are like, this is all evidence now. This all could be evidence in a fraud hearing against the DNC. And every one of our elected representatives might be implicated. Like, madness.
So we really, really want this discovery process, and I don't think that the media could ignore if Debbie Wasserman Schultz has to testify in court under oath. Though I wouldn't trust her to. But I can't imagine it. But even now, I'm shocked and kind of surprised at how little attention it's received. By even in the local South Florida, none of the smaller newspapers have covered it when they've, they were, some of them were, a couple of them were pretty good about covering, Tim Condova and, the Bernie supporters opposing Debbie Wasserman Schultz down in South Florida. So for those reasons, I'm not sure why people aren't getting at it. My guess is a lot of people still don't know about this lawsuit, and even weeks ago, people every time it was brought up, people were like, "What's going on with the lawsuit? Is there still a lawsuit?" Like, people really weren't kept up with it, and I think that was that's obviously deliberate and success from the blackout. That's really what they want. So I think it's important. So you were really one of the first people on top of it in social media as soon as those transcripts came out. I mean, Bernie people were talking about the hearing before, but no one was really covering it. And then the hearing happened on Tuesday, and then Jared Beck was like, "Why aren't these people covering it? You should cover it. You should cover it." And I've even sent out a couple of emails myself to people like, you guys should cover this, but nothing back. And the there's been a lot of drama and gossip among people who have covered it. I know a lot of people have been really angry at TYT Michael Schur's comments, really reducing the lawsuit, which I think is very unfortunate. This hasn't gotten media attention, but personal level and emotional level, this lawsuit is very, because it is a class action lawsuit. It involves anyone who emotionally invested their time, their money into Bernie Sanders' campaign, and were cheated throughout it, were attacked with these really divisive narratives that struck a chord in people personally. The Bernie Bros narrative, the whitewashing of his campaign, the constant attacks, feeling cheated, watching things like the Arizona primary, what happened there, the New York voter roll purge, all these things, that haven't been addressed at all. Not one reform, not one actual change. We still have a Unity Commission meeting on Monday for the DNC over whether or not, like it's a question as though whether they should get rid of superdelegates, and some of the people on the commission are actually superdelegates making that decision. So it's really, really unfortunate. So what are your thoughts on what's been going on with Tim Black and Nico and everything, and really people are trying to reduce what really Sanders supporters and independent media have, they've been a huge part of this movement in aggregating information and getting things out there. So you're one of those biggest people. What are your thoughts on everything that's going on with that?
Yeah, I mean, I really feel like, I honestly feel like we are drinking from two fire hoses right now, because I am not even done with Shattered yet. And Shattered was giving me like nights of anxiety, just how many things are unraveling in the Hillary Clinton Shattered, the failed campaign story in depth of how embarrassing their entire existence was. I was like literally like flabbergasted because of that. And then this hit now too. And basically every single thing from last year is unraveling now. Every single thing that people said in defense of Hillary Clinton's campaign being legitimately good is just like completely undone and shattered. And everyone's argument that it was a fair primary is completely exposed, as the Democrats don't even care if it was a fair primary or not, because they don't feel legal accountable either way. So it's like, there's so much, like, I know a lot of people aren't going to dig for this information. That's the weird thing, is it's just like, there's, right now, I think one of the big reasons that it's hard to report on this is it's, and you probably know this, writers, it's a really challenging thing to write about, just to understand what's going on. I've worked in the legal industry for the past 10 years. I basically read court memos and stuff. We analyze this stuff like this is work. If I don't do a good job, I'm like nervous I'm going to lose my job. So it's like I do this basically for a living, whereas I analyze like all these types of things, arguments, look for traces of evidence. You just plan this all out. And that's hard to do. And I just think there is also partly a lack of just people who understand enough to be able to report on it that is influencing the small amount of content that's coming out about it. You have to basically reduce it down to its simplest terms, and those simplest terms are bad for Democrats. So I want to, and I have to talk to Jared Beck about this, because I want to do a simulation where I pretend that I'm the DNC's lawyer, and I don't want to do it at a point where they could like actually use the notes in court, because I obviously don't want to help them, but like, as what you do in the legal industry, if you're a good lawyer, I'm not a lawyer, paralegal, but you always plan out what the opposite side is going to argue. And so I planned out in my head exactly what I expected the DNC to argue in court, and they fucked everything all over. They were a hot ass mess. Like they did, like I was like, guys, like I'm just a lay person reading the news for the last 10 years, and I had a better argument for you guys. Like, what happened? How bad are you? I want to simulate an argument just because I want to expose to people what it would look like if the Democrats were actually good at being corrupt, because they suck at being corrupt, and so they keep getting exposed, just keep sweeping it under the rug. You know, in terms of like the coverage and stuff, I just like, I'm so desperate for indie media to be able to move forward and grow and replace corporate media, because just that is a massive undertaking that needs to happen right now. And I think it's a really opportune time because of how much the corporate media conglomerated around Hillary Clinton. It's now one big beast. To some extent, Trump was challenging that, because obviously Trump was completely antagonizing the media the entire election. That was something that we all related to, because he was just clowning. You know, it's like the CNN, you're fake news. It's like those things are such headlines and easy for Democrats to write off. But at the same time, people understand why those things mean something and need to be said right now. And to some extent, that Trump effect, I think, it is good in breaking the corporate media structure down to make it smaller. Like, we need to break up the banks. We need to break up the corporate media structure. And so I think that, like, we need independent media, and we need to remind people what independent media structures and business models look like, so people can figure out how to make fucking like legitimately good, thriving local media entities based on community boards that have opinions on how well things are being reported, and talking to the voters and talking to the people that watch the news, and not talking to people who are paying for the commercials. So in my opinion, like, you know, I think it's like, you know, I don't know. I think that the like real attention to this case needs to be supporting the lawyers. They are doing so much work and under so much pressure, especially in the wake of Sean Lucas's death, that we need to have just pure emotional support, and anything we can do to open source this investigation and show how much solidarity we have to Jared and Elizabeth. That's our number one priority. And from there, in my opinion, independent media, we should all be just challenging all of our friends, all of the Democrats, all the people we know, all the superdelegates in our states, all of our electeds, all of every single person to take a stand on this and figure out how they feel about it. Because, you know, this election showed us everyone's true colors to begin with, and now I have it point blank. And so maybe if you just didn't believe me that I said Hillary Clinton could never win, because she never wins anything. She sucks at campaigning for the same reason she sucks as Secretary of State and all these same things. She's going to fail all the time. As much as people didn't want to believe me now, like, part of that was the primary wasn't rigged. Part of that was, you know, to what extent was the DNC doing their best to give Bernie a fair shot. Now we have so much proof that regardless of what happened, the DNC's lawyers don't even feel legally accountable to anything. So it's like everything is completely unraveled now. So it's like, no matter if people agree with my take on what happened last year or not, the Democrats have said in court they don't give a shit because they're above the law. Literally, this is the same thing that Barack and Hillary have been doing this entire time. We're above the law. Oh, what do you mean? Like, oh, you think the Attorney General is actually going to, you know, it's like, oh, no, we've been with the Lynches forever. Like, they're like, the DNC showed up in court and said, we see no accountability legally for what we're doing. We are above the law. Too big to fail, too big to jail. Peace out, judge. And that's basically what they submitted the motion to dismiss on. So if someone's not appalled by that, I'm cool with just totally like just disagreeing politically with that person and moving forward. And I think what independent media needs to be doing is circulating this knowledge and challenging individuals think about this, and as they do that, learn to support independent business models that are cropping up to replace corporate media as it collapses. And it's just a lot of pettiness. I'm like, get your stories right, people. Get your facts right. Don't try to make claims about who broke a story if it doesn't matter, if it's not relevant. Like, honestly, we have so many truths to unravel and to understand. I just think there's some pettiness, and it's just, to me, it's like, I don't have time for that shit. We need to be crowdsourcing and working on everything in support of Jared. So as much as we can do now, the better. I don't care who's working on the group, who's in charge of the group project or not. We need to get it done.
What this lawsuit is, it's really a challenge to the establishment. Like, fuck you, establishment. You're not going to get away with what you out for. And that needs to be driven and discussed. And it provides an opportunity, like Shattered does as well. Though, I've, writing about it, I've poked the problems in there because the one of the authors, Jonathan Allen, worked for a PAC run by Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and obviously the Clinton campaign wasn't going to grant access to journalists that were going to really criticize or attack them, and really it's a controlled opposition. And reading it, I've had a tough time reading it because every time Bernie Sanders or his supporters are mentioned, it's not in a positive light at all. It's really the same, the Clinton mindset stereotype of what Bernie and his supporters are, propagated through that. People think they reduce it to, it was just the WikiLeaks emails, and other than that, you wouldn't have known that the primaries were rigged, and that was just because they nitpicked or something, or manufactured a narrative to make it seem like that. That's absolutely ridiculous. I was saying it, you were saying it, people were saying the primaries were rigged long before there were any emails released. One of the biggest things I think was overtly that was really ignored is in February, news broke, and when the news broke, Washington Post and other outlets were like, "Oh, this is normal." Debbie Wasserman Schultz really rescinded the ban on corporate lobbyists and PACs donating to the DNC that Obama enacted in 2008. Obama didn't say anything, so obviously Obama was okay with it. And what that lifting ban did is it enabled the Hillary Victory Fund. And without that, the Clinton campaign wouldn't have been able to keep up with Bernie Sanders in fundraising. She out fundraised them just a little bit because of that Hillary Victory Fund, which even Bernie called that out. Because it was violating campaign finance laws. Politico reported that it was laundering money in April 2016, and then in June 2016, they noticed that they reported that the DNC tried to cover up that it even existed, what the thing was. So they had a fundraising deal with the Clinton campaign, and they cheated to fundraise in it. That was called out. That alone should be enough. That alone should be enough. There's a variety of reasons. When I wrote about the hearing initially, the day before, like what Wasserman Schultz said, that was clearly like violating the neutrality, and like constantly throughout. Anytime she made a media appearance, it was passive aggressive fuck you to Bernie supporters.
Can I rant on something related here?
By all means, rant. This is what we're here for the rants.
Well, I'm listening to what you say, and I'm like itemizing. I'm like point. So two things that I think are important to be talking about, and part of what I like about Twitter, and this is funny because it's kind of the backstory now. I have my notes. I just wrote down what I need to remember to tell you. Bernie, so some people know this about me, some people don't. I like telling people because it really it changed my life. It created who I am as my brain and a legal thinker and everything. But this is what I think is one of the most important things about Twitter and reading is when I was really little and I realized that I was gay, I had to look to find out how to defend myself because I didn't know what to say. I literally didn't know what the words were. I hadn't learned them yet. And so I went looking for someone who was defending gay people. And the first person I found was Bernie Sanders. And I read his words and I remembered those words, and those sentences stuck in my mind. And so I was able to say them. And the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, this amazing hypothesis about like the words that create the way you think, and it does. And so that's what I like about Twitter is, if I can say things that people are trying to find those words, they see it when I say it, and it clicks with them, that's the point. And we need to have so much of that type of light bulbs coming on about this DNC lawsuit, all the implications, and what people need to be doing as action items in their own communities to make a difference in the media revolution. More of those light bulbs need to happen. And so again, that's why I think it's really important that more of the citizen journalism, independent journalism is happening. And part of the thing that I think is important that people are talking about and saying when we're talking about what the problem was, that's derivative of the class damages that are being sought, is the term rigged primary and what that means. The thing that I think is the most important that we need to be constantly bringing up whenever we're talking about it is the fact that all of this stuff was exposed before any Americans voted. If the Americans had started voting and they had some excuse to say Hillary Clinton was getting the majority, we had to start favoring her, that would be much more defensible in court than to say they planned all this out before any Americans voted. Not a single American had a say in this. This was 100% done and decided before a single American cast their vote, and they could really even get a feel for if Hillary Clinton would get 1% of the vote, much less the majority of it. And that to me is critical understanding how damning this lawsuit is, because we have proof from the WikiLeaks, from the Hillary Victory Fund, which started well before. I mean, she obviously the Clinton Foundation, in my opinion, was her international super PAC that she wanted to start collecting money with before she could run for president. And then as soon as she could get away with creating something in the United States, they unhinged everything to create the Hillary Victory Fund. I think there's a very clear pattern of how they did it to try and build as much fundraising capacity as they could. And the funniest fucking thing is, Mike, and I was thinking about this because I was like, if it's going to be Hillary, I'm going to want a Democrat to win. In my head, that Democrats were still better back then. So I'm like, maybe I'll work for the Hillary Clinton campaign. So here's me thinking, how am I going to defend her? Because I probably would have defended her over Ted Cruz. I don't know. Like, I probably would have voted for Hillary Clinton over Ted Cruz. As weird as that is, like, he's more psychotic to me than she is. Like, but I had planned out what I was expecting to have to say to defend Hillary Clinton, and never once in the entire time, all of these people who construe themselves as political geniuses, construe themselves as like, oh, I'm so smart, everyone should be just happy to be in my presence because I exude knowledge and sage about how to win elections. Fucking idiot. It's ridiculous that they even think that they can still live on that ego. But the other thing is just like, they didn't even have a reasonably defensive line of reasoning why they had to do this obscene fundraising. The honest approach that I thought that Hillary Clinton should have used from before that was to just point blank say, hey, look, guys, we're going to be up against the Republicans in the first election post Citizens United. I have to do as much as I can. I hope it's not fraudulent. If other people are doing it too, let's compare notes. Why didn't she just fucking call it out right, point blank, say what she's doing is trying to outraise the Republicans, just under the premise that it's been post-Citizens United and Republicans theoretically are going to do a lot better with fundraising because in theory, Democrats aren't as good as fundraising because they theoretically don't care as much about money, so they're not doing that. So Hillary could have made a legitimately reasonable, honest argument to say, I need to expand my fundraising capacity as much as possible for the good of the Democratic Party early on. And even if that would have turned out to be a lie, that to me is a totally sober thing to say to justify how much massive fundraising was going on and in ways that was like pushing the law that has never happened before. Obviously, we're in a completely new time because post-Citizens United, everything has changed, and how long it's been since then, each election, it's playing out differently since then. And so she just never took the opportunity. Her people are too dumb to even consider like telling a shard of the truth and saying, look, let's actually just like, no, actually, guys, let's be cool, Hillary, now, and be like, look, guys, sorry, I had to be fucking conniving as shit because we need to beat fucking Ted Cruz, and that means I'm gonna, like, honestly, one of the things that I did think was impressive about Hillary Clinton when I read her book, Hard Choices, the gay dating app, Hard Choices, the Hillary Clinton book, like when I read that book, if Hillary and her campaign hadn't insulted me the entire election, maybe what I would have felt more likely to say respectful things about Hillary, as few as they are. But one of the things that I did think was impressive about Hillary when I was observing her as Secretary of State, she traveled her ass off. And she met with so many people in so many different countries. And her book read just like, and then I saw so-and-so, and then I saw so-and-so, and then I saw so-and-so. They all tell me I'm amazing. And it's like you want to bomb it entire book, but at the same time it's kind of like, actually, that you can show up and talk to all of these people in the world that they'll even have you. Obviously, this speaks to how much money everybody's all interested. You have greed in common with all of these people, but that actually could have been construed as something positive for her. Like she's physically capable to travel all over the world and can like to rally support for a new America in the future, talking to so many people. You know, it's like she could have really construed it as a power move, but they just tried to downplay it and lie about it the entire time. So now they're fucked. And so it's like I it's so crazy because like the whole fundraising stuff, none of it was approached honestly, and so here they are in court being completely dishonest. But if they would have went to court, for example, and said the one word that I didn't fucking read, and I need to go troll this whole script again to make sure I didn't see it, but I'm basically positive that they didn't say the word superdelegate in the entire court hearing. And this is what I want to unravel in a mock debate with Jared, because I thought that here it is, y'all. This is Zach Haller's theory on what the DNC was going to argue. I thought that they were going to go in saying, look, y'all, we obviously have super delegates. To some extent, you know that there is a component of the party that says we have to do what's in the best interest of the party, period. And sometimes we know that goes against the interest of the voters. But the super delegate system is evidence that everyone knows about it and knows that those super delegates influence it. And they should have relied on the fact that people participated, knowing the super delegate system was there, trusting the super delegate system as a way to say, look, Americans, maybe you don't feel like your vote is counting, but the Democrats, we have institutionalized superdelegates as a way to help our party win in general over the other party, period. Sorry if you don't like that. They could have said that. That would have been totally reasonable, right? Does that sound reasonable to say?
No, it hasn't been in other things. Jam-packed, they have all the court things. So they've made similar arguments where they've used that neutrality is a political promise. And another thing they argued is they picked off like some of the Bernie Sanders supporters. They went on their Facebooks who are listed in the class action lawsuit, and they're like, this guy said, "Oh, fuck Hillary, the primaries are rigged," and they're like, so he knew they were rigged and he donated anyways. So let's throw this lawsuit out, which is a stupid argument. But they've made these really stupid arguments, and relying on the super delegate thing and saying like overtly, obviously we do whatever the fuck we want. We have super delegates. Fuck you. Would have been part of the argument. But this guy, I don't think. I think Bruce Reeve is his name. He didn't. I don't think he was in other earlier hearings. So I think they pulled out a new lawyer, because I think the original lawyer, Mark Elias, who was also the Clinton campaign manager's lawyer. So they had the Clinton campaign manager's lawyer initially running this case, and now he is running he's the consulting attorney for Eric Holder's redistricting thing that Obama's going to do. So they must have brought this guy in and say, this is what we're arguing. Just, go on, argue those. So I don't think he was authorized, or they told him to whatever firm he's working for, and told him to bring up any new arguments or say anything else, just drive this.
That's probably right, but if I would have been around that table trying to figure out the most defensible situation, and that's probably exactly why it was not mentioned point blank, is because that was a line of argument that hadn't been presented yet, and they wouldn't. But I don't know. It's just there's, to me, obviously the superdelegate element is a corrupt element, but the thing is like it really doesn't matter that much how much we go back and like Bernie Sanders supporters said they knew it was rigged. Those aren't really that like those anecdotes and people saying that they know it was rigged or whatever, those don't really, from a legal standpoint, they can't really necessarily dismiss any of the claims that are being made necessarily, because there is a variety of claims to be made. So if we wanted to think about if we were to hypothesize, for example, just out of, just to think about it, if we were to hypothesize how those types of Facebook posts or things like that could hurt the lawsuit, we would want to look at each of the three classes to begin with and say, how would that affect the merits of the donors to Bernie Sanders? How would that affect the merits of the donors to the Democratic Party? And how would that affect the merits of the Democratic Party voters who were owed the benefit of the impartiality, even if they kind of knew that it wasn't rigged? It kind of doesn't really know how much the people knew that it was rigged, because people don't have to trust their government. The Constitution says the government needs to be run fairly, whether people trust it or not. So those little types of concerns, like, that's part of the reason why I'm like, okay, we just need to get on thought police a lot and just like help make sure people are worried about the right things, because people should know that there are very, very drastic elements of this that cannot be very quickly undone. And those types of things, I don't want people to feel demoralized by thinking that, like, oh, if we all were saying it was rigged. We all were saying it was rigged. If they wanted to say clearly everybody knew it was rigged, obviously, like, they could print my whole Twitter feed and read them out in court, and I'd be right. It's like, obviously that discussion was being had. Obviously that didn't, it kind of affects part of the case in general in terms of like how you're analyzing the fraud that took place. But if you just look at the classes, it doesn't really, no individual anecdote about individuals expecting or asserting that the primary was rigged changed the fact that the decisions were made to favor a candidate before any Americans voted. And that happened. And because that happened, basically, if that's confirmed, it's basically just like the whole primary was a charade. And like all of the public funds and all of the public's time and energy that went into a public contest with Democrats, that was all literally just a horse and pony show. It was literally just a horse and pony show. And the amount of fraud that would incur is mind-blowing on a state-by-state basis, how much public funds were blown if it was proved to be that way. So I think that it's more, those are interesting considerations, but it kind of doesn't, if you look at each class and you're trying to look at the weaknesses of each class in terms of how they could lose justification for damages, I think that all three classes have substantial justification for damages, and the judge could dismiss them individually to some extent. But again, you're looking at three piles, you're looking at three separate sets of damages, and basically it's like, like Space Invaders, where you're just trying to break them down. Like if he dismisses every single element of it, it's just like, that's a 28-page Excel spreadsheet of all of these different elements that were dismissed of each of these different classes. So those types of things I wouldn't worry too much about. I don't think they'll have an effect on it. I think it's really going to come down to how public funds are used on a state-by-state basis, and the relationship between, the judge is going to really have to decide to what extent impartiality should be guaranteed. And to me, it's kind of a non-negotiable thing, because you can't say it's impartial is not that big of a deal. It's just a political promise on a federal level, but you can't say that to every state. You can't be like, it's just the federal government that gets to be impartial in primaries. Every state. Could you imagine if all of a sudden they put the floodgates open and said it's fine to have primaries be impartial, and what that would mean on local mayoral races, things like that? Like, there's no way that they could just say, oh, it can just all be impartial across the board now, and they can't just itemize out the federal government and say they have the opportunity to be impartial when states don't have to be. States' funds are being used to put on the primaries for the reason to hear people's votes, which are guaranteed to them. So it just rattles pretty quickly, which is good. I just think it's really, I think each of the cases has, I can't completely decide.
Yeah, I can't imagine whatever the judge decides that he's going to, sugarcoat anything about what the DNC or Democratic Party is trying to argue. Because it is ridiculous, and they are really excusing themselves from upholding democracy, even though everyone knows we don't have a democracy anymore. We have an oligarchy, and the Clinton campaign and the DNC and the 2016 Democratic primaries really confirmed that. It was just starting in 2013 when Hillary left the State Department. Washington Post called it her pre-campaign campaign. She would receive like 17 awards every couple of weeks. She was receiving awards, so that's what Chelsea Clinton started to receive awards, which is scary. Yes, just to bring her up, but that's what they do to court elite donors and rub shoulders with elites. They have these establishment organizations that will access the Clintons and their donor network, and in exchange, the Clintons get some positive publicity without much political risk, and then in turn they get access to donors, and it's just this whole elitist networking thing. So she won 17 awards. Even Bill Clinton's getting awards. I've cited in articles that Bill Clinton won a national Father of the Year award in 2013, which is absolutely ridiculous. Chelsea Clinton's in her 30s, and you win these frivolous awards. Year, every 2 weeks, a mainstream media outlet was like, "Will Hillary Clinton run for president?" And there's a YouTube viral clip of Chris Cuomo saying overtly, "She's freezing out everyone else in the campaign. The media couldn't be helping her out any more than they have." I really would I think it's a really good opportunity to address all those concerns and, raise the evidence, because it's really been swept under the rug, anything, and just diluted into just, Bernie supporters are upset, and it's ridiculous. So, hopefully we got to all keep doing what we're doing, and bring attention to this lawsuit and use it as an opportunity to discuss what the merits are in this lawsuit, and what needs to be done. So that's what I've seen people talk about it, like what best case scenario, the lawsuit goes through, and the Sanders supporters actually win the lawsuit. Then what next? So what are your thoughts on best case scenario? The Sanders supporters win the lawsuit. Where do we go from there? And do you think it'll actually result in some heads falling off at the Democratic Party finally?
It's going to be really, really interesting to see how it plays out, because I think honestly that the Democratic Party is going to start to crumble well before this. And I think you're going to start to see a lot more resignations. I think you're going to start to see a lot more people not running for re-election in 2018. And I don't think that this is going to, I don't think anything major is going to develop on this in terms of knowing a judge's decision on anything before 2018 primary, before the midterm elections. Nothing is going to happen for that. I think that there's going to be as much damage control to keep people not talking about this as possible going into 2018. I expect the Democrats to humiliate themselves again, unless the progressives could stop focusing on trying to figure out who to run in 2020 and how to get a people's party together for 2018. Unless the progressives do well in 2018, I think the Republicans are just going to keep doing better because the Democrats keep doing their failed bullshit. But at the same time, I think that pressure and fallout from this lawsuit is going to start to affect. I mean, the good thing is despite the fact that this is going to take a while for it to flesh out, people in the media industry are already seeing how damning it is. And so I'm sure they are already starting to fly off the ship. And it's interesting because one of the things that I want to write about sometime soon is I basically want to just have a call to arms and be like, attention, every single American who works in the media. If you're a good person, just fucking quit your job right now. The faster we can, all of the good people come out. Come out, we'll help you. We'll help you support. We'll get you on Patreon. We'll get you out of that. Because so many people, just like the banks, so many people are just invested in these massive organizations because they've been a part of it for so long. And I think that this lawsuit and the real threat of serious implications to many people, I think is going to scare some people into being a little bit more ethical. And it's ridiculous that I have to be thank God for finally actually scaring some people into fucking following rules and not breaking laws. But I do think that there's going to be a lot of fallout between now and then that is going to kind of mitigate some of the severity of this lawsuit. And people are going to be able to have ducked and covered by the time that it gets to discovery phase. So I think that there's going to be less to do. And I also think that if they really time it well, this is going to be going on before the next 2020 election. And people like Bernie Sanders and Nina Turner aren't going to want to be doing depositions because they have bigger fish to fry at that point. And so if they stall it out later, there are going to be other influences that make even people who would benefit from a fair and long and well-developed discovery process just want it to be over and just decline to be involved and just to try and forget about stuff that happened instead of really litigating every single minor detail of this. So I think that there's going to be a lot of fallout in the next 2 years, and after 2018, we will probably be able to maybe something will happen sooner. We should ask Jared what his hunch is on timeline. I just would find it to be very surprising if anything came in sooner than 3 to 6 months. Is pretty fast turnaround in general for the court, and it's like we're already at that point going into the 2018 congressional elections. Like, I just don't think that this is going to happen for 2018's election. So if Jared also supposes that if that's the timeline, there's going to be so much fallout that happens and so much redistribution of people that there are going to be a lot of former relationships that are stopping, business deals, partnerships that are ending. And I would encourage people to, this is why we want people to know about it, is because it makes them more all the like comfortable saying, okay, I'm going to move out of the anything corporate media related industry, and hopefully there will be jobs that come more in independent media, whatever. But I think that there is going to be a lot of fallout on this that happens on very surface levels that's maybe not even necessarily acknowledged publicly, really hard to observe. But I think scare the shit out of a lot of people to the point that a lot of people are behaving ethically and be a lot more sensitive to this going into 2018. So that's going to help galvanize the way people are fundraising in 2018, which I think will help us pick better candidates in 2018. So I do see some positive effects to address some of the problems that we have happening between now and the time the discovery passes. At the point that all of the evidence is heard and the judge rules on these three things, I mean, it's really astronomical to think about how much damages could possibly be owed if you were like working at a big law firm trying to go for the big money, no whammies. Like, how much can we juice the DNC for? I mean, 200 some $1 million were just donated to Bernie Sanders alone. And I don't think that, I think it would be really hard and extra for the judge to go in to say, Bernie donors, like, we know that you put in money, or we know that you put in time and resources and energy to quantify all that. Class action lawsuits, there are some plausibility components to issuing ruling action lawsuits. So I could see it be much more likely that they say, we are awarding Bernie Sanders donors 48% of the donations that they submitted that year, because that's how much we think that they were shorted. That's how much less we think that they would given if they would have really understood what was going on from the Democrats' perspective. They would have given half as much, but they still would have done campaign. I think it would be harder to kind of suss that out. So I think that Bernie donors could expect to reasonably get a percentage from 25 to 100% of their donations back. I think people who donated to the Democratic Party have a lesser case, but still a case, and maybe could receive 5 to 20% of a donation, just as the tax to the DNC for being impartial. And then I could see the DNC being levied with a massive fine for what they did. And I honestly see it as being the demise of the party, unless Obama finds a way to raise a bunch of $1 million, raise a huge amount of money to pay off the DNC's bill at that point. I think that the way that they would police the DNC, that's the thing, is Debbie Wasserman is named in this. So I need to talk to Jared about what her protections as an individual, because obviously they could come for her assets basically.
Do you think they'll throw her under the bus just to take the heat from it? Like, this is all her. Like they kind of did what Donna Brazile, CNN did to save themselves. Just CNN did. The DNC were like, they don't give a shit. But the CNN was like, fuck you, Donna Brazile. We're firing you. We had nothing to do with this, which is probably unlikely. But they severed ties and threw her under the bus in that regard, and the Democratic Party saved her, and she still won't stop talking about Russia to excuse herself from it. So
Yeah. And that's a really good question, and that's something that we should also kind of think about and talk to Jared and others about what we think is Debbie's role in this. Because that's a really interesting element that I would look to similar cases where in any political case where there was an individual named as part of a lawsuit against a political body to see what judges typically do in that. I feel like, she's named as a defendant. Her name is, to some extent, she as a person is very implicated by this. So throwing her under the bus really doesn't really do that much. I mean, they may eventually come up with a strategy where they give her a line that says, yes, I admit something, 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 because, that actually might be something that becomes a likely consideration, because if Debbie were to be able to concede some criminality to it, they could probably easier rely on being like, okay, Debbie's going to get a sentence to prison that we can bail her out of or whatever. And it may be from a damage control standpoint easier to throw her under the bus and let her take a personal sentence. That to me is very unlikely they're like, none of us are getting elected, right? No, we all promised each other. None of us are going to get arrested. We're all in it together. And I legitimately feel like that's what all they say is that they just promised each other and that they're going to legitimately be walled up together, hiding from prison forever. I would love for them to be arrested, but it's I just don't think any of them are at this point. I think financial damages will be given back to Bernie Sanders donors, to a lesser extent other donors, and I think a fine will be waged on the DNC for what they did. But I don't know what would happen to Debbie, how it would affect her. Hopefully in 2018, progressives sweep. And hopefully it's just so obvious that Tulsi's going to be president in 2020 that it's everybody's like, oh my God, there's actually going to be about 50 people going to jail. Bankers and corrupt politicians are actually going to start going to jail now. Hopefully the dream will live and we'll actually have some accountability for people who commit crimes, no matter how rich they are at that point. But I don't know how likely that is. I think that each class should reasonably expect to be honored with damages, and I think that will be financial for most people, and then a fine for the DNC.
So, I hope so, and I think this is helping people, continue to wake up, because even in the past month, the rift between progressives and the Democrats not changing anything, has been really apparent, and they really haven't been hiding, going after Bernie on a few issues, like the John Ossoff thing. And I think with the media since the election, they've been hiring more conservatives. I wrote about it a couple earlier this week, and Ben Spielberg. Now, if you're not following him on Twitter, he's a good one to follow. He wrote about it also, that there aren't any anti-establishment people in the mainstream media. The New York Times hired the Bret Stephens, climate denier, racist. Hugh Hewitt's going to get a show on MSNBC's and talks. They hired the Fox News broadcaster, Greta Van Susteren. The Rachel Maddow tax fraud, gimmick that she pulled. I don't think there was any reason for progressives to be watching Maddow before that, but given from that, I don't see why anyone would trust anything she says, on top of the whole Russia conspiracies being touted by. It's particularly the one about Bernie Sanders supporters, which I very pissed off about, because it implemented all the Bernie groups that I've been an invested member in, and I know you have, and most likely is a member of those groups, and probably some administrators. So and they really transmogrified the story, distorted the story to fit that narrative, and again attack progressives. So that said, hopefully from this past is probably the most the lawsuit has been attention wise. which I think is a great thing. And hopefully, how do we sustain that given that we're probably not going to hear anything back for a while from the judge?
That's a great question, and I hope it's just kind of a matter of like waking more people model of basically like today. I just pledged $2 a month to Tim Black, and easy, smart way to start supporting new independent journalists. So I think more people waking up to that and letting this kind of progressive indie media group grow, I think that that's going to have a positive effect in general. And so the more that we can get people to know that we should be doing that, get people like, it's like, I hate to more of us, but like more people in our real progressives community, who have been following, whether they want to start doing their own lives or their own contribution, that's their choice, but they should at least consider being more involved in their community or with talking about it with their family and friends because they know about it, asking questions to their local reporters, trying to hold them accountable, looking for work at local news organizations. I was going to say, like, we will see. I don't expect the mainstream media to figure this out anytime soon. I think they're going to try to go down with their sinking Titanic, right? But if the mainstream media anywhere wants to try to build back progressive credibility, they would call you and hire you, or they would call me and hire me. They would call.
Or they would at least like interview people like us, and that's not happening. So to fill that void, we have to do this stuff ourselves. And get that out there. And people need to do that. So
I'll keep writing. Hopefully, there's I think a lot of it is just kind of the weird timing of it that just kind of came out of nowhere, and people don't understand like the kind of like the mechanics of the case and why we're talking about it now, and just telling people that it happened and reminding people of the timeline and where we're at is just going to be something that we should kind of always keep in mind. I don't think that there's going to be another development on this for a long time, so I guess I don't have an answer to that question in terms of how we keep sustaining the conversation about it, other than in supporting indie media organizations. And what I was going to say is maybe that Progressive Army piece that just came out today, somebody at some point either referred to you or me or one of us writing about this as people who are focused on election integrity. And I think that that's something that that phrase is something we should think about as journalists and as readers and as citizens, is let's talk about election integrity in general going forward. And part of people understanding that that's the body of, philosophy we need to be considering as we reform our society. We need to talk about election integrity. Let's talk about what's happened recently on both sides. Because the Republicans, obviously, they're doing their gerrymandering and they're doing their voter suppression on their own. Theirs is just not getting busted. Obviously, Obama was Democrat, in office for the last 8 years. So we're dealing with more Democrat recently. But the more people talk about election integrity and the more people write about election integrity and think about what election integrity means on local levels and stuff like that, I think that will keep this lawsuit alive in conversations about what's going on now. And so that's going to be something that I just kind of think about thematically as a writer and as a person who talks on Twitter and hopes people pay attention, is talking about election integrity and what that means and what we see going on around us with special elections. And Seattle, we've got 2017 elections this year in Seattle. So election integrity, it's Washington runs things very well. I moved here for many reasons, liberal politics being mainly number one, and things run in general fairly well. There's obviously a lot of kind of behind the scenes, power movers, power players that need to be addressed from election integrity standpoint. But it's elections are going to be happening constantly between now and 2020, when probably something will have come out where it will change the way the DNC fundraises and the DNC favors or not favors a candidate in the 2020 election. But until then, I think it's just a matter of focusing on the conversation around election integrity as elections happen between now and then, and making sure that people realize that no matter whether they like to believe it or not, this is what the DNC has said in the court of law as what the Democratic Party stands for, and you need to take a hard line on that one way or the other. If you don't want to take a hard line on whether it's okay to take corporate donations or not, you need to at least take a hard line on if it's okay that the DNC thinks it's fine to operate with no legal accountability for listening to voters as they engage those voters in the primary process. So we can force that. We can force people to take that stand, and hopefully people are on the right side of history on that one.
Hopefully. So, you know, I don't want to go too over 10 o'clock, but, you know, Zach, you know, thanks for coming on to do this on a Friday night. You know, I appreciate it, and hopefully we can do this again soon. You know, definitely, I think we need to doing stuff more like this, and just bouncing ideas back and forth, and bouncing solutions back and forth. You know, not just because you are in a different part of the country, but this is what we really need to be doing. Is doing the work ourselves. So, you know, that being said, we'll keep an eye out for your legal expertise on the lawsuit, and you know, maybe there's BeLive. This medium has a rate, like you can pull in guests, so you have like 4 more people. So I think maybe we should set up a bigger thing with Jared and Elizabeth to come on, and maybe me, you, and we can get maybe a couple other people to pick their brain and discuss like what just everything about the lawsuit. So I think we should keep driving.
Yeah.
Thing.
I agree, and on that, I want to start talking about, and I want to ask Jared and Elizabeth this, is what we can do to help specifically in terms of, like, I'm like legitimately, I'm like trying to open source the trial prep. I'm like, I know what trial prep looks like. It's, they have plenty of time, but like, obviously the more that we have in the public domain as like written in stone, what is evidence in this case and who should be coming in for depositions, my Medium account is going to start to look like their trial prep one way or the other, because I'm going to be identifying all of the evidence that Americans need to know they get fucked over by if it gets taken away from them. So like, that's to me my goal. It's just to compile as much, rationale for Americans to realize how invested in the outcome of this lawsuit they need to be. So when the lawsuit happens, they understand the gravity of it, and they don't, and so they know as a person in their heart how fuming and how much they should change their political perspective because of this lawsuit, because the mainstream media obviously wants them to not even talk about it or think about it, and just let the corruption slide like it always does.
I agree. So I'll get in touch with you to figure something out with Jared and Elizabeth whenever they're free. But Zach, thanks again. Thanks everyone for tuning in on a Friday night. So we'll be back next week doing our shows Wednesday and Thursday. So good night, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Good one, guys. Thanks, Mike.